Welcome, everyone. I am Rabbi Susan Nanis, one of the rabbis at Wilshire Boulevard Temple. On behalf of myself and Rabbi Leader, who's here with us tonight, we want to welcome you to this program that we are partnering with the American Jewish Committee on the Global Briefing on Anti-Semitism, the first of 4 lectures that we will be offering. We are dedicated to bringing these high-level programs to our congregation and to the community, and we're so happy that you could join us. I'd like to introduce the chairman of the board of AJC, Scott Edelman, to say a few words. Please welcome him.
Thank you, Susan. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I have the pleasure as serving as the president of AJC Los Angeles and also a member of the Board of Trustees of Wilshire Boulevard Temple. So it's my privilege to be wearing 2 hats tonight before you. I'm very proud that these 2 institutions, AJC and Wilshire Boulevard Temple, have a special relationship in Los Angeles. In the aftermath of the Pittsburgh synagogue attack that took 11 Jewish lives, we brought together elected officials, diplomats, and diverse community partners from around Los Angeles to the synagogue to reaffirm our shared values. Last year, we brought top U.S. military experts in partnership with JINSA, the Jewish Institute for National Security in America, to brief our community on the security threats posed by Hezbollah in the United States and Israel. And tonight, we inaugurate AJC's 2nd Global Briefing Series, and we are thankful to Wilshire Boulevard Temple for hosting us. AJC was founded in 1906 on the heels of pogroms against Jews in Eastern Europe, and we have been combating anti-Semitism ever since. Through our day in and day out relationship building with governments across the world to the diverse people that occupy its streets, AJC proudly serves, as John Kerry called us, the State Department of the Jewish people. A recent landmark survey of American Jews conducted by AJC revealed deep concerns about anti-Semitism in the United States. Nearly 9 out of 10 American Jews say anti-Semitism is a problem in the U.S. today. 9 out of 10 American Jews. Nearly a third have avoided publicly wearing, carrying, or displaying things that might help identify them as Jews. 25% of those surveyed say they avoid certain places, events, or situations at least sometime out of concern for their safety or comfort as Jews. This is a real wake-up call. Unfortunately, we have become used to the news from Europe, from France, where in 2015, as we all remember, an ISIS terrorist brutally murdered 4 Jews in a kosher supermarket, and many incidents since. From Germany, where a neo-Nazi terrorist unsuccessfully tried to enter a synagogue in Halle and instead killed 2 people nearby. But until Pittsburgh, Poway, and Monsey, how many of us thought this was a major life-threatening issue today in the United States? Fortunately, with this lecture series, we have excellent staff resources to help us better understand these phenomena. Dr. Saba Sumac is AJC's Assistant Los Angeles Director of Interreligious and Intercommunity Affairs and a lecturer at the Academy of Jewish Religion. She is the editor of the book Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews in America and the author of the book From the Shahs to Los Angeles, 3 Generations of Iranian Jewish Women Between Religion and Culture. Her book was awarded the gold medal in the 2013 Independent Publisher Book Award in the religion category. Saba, could you please stand up? There you are. And presenting tonight is Holly Huffnagel, who serves as the Assistant Director of International Relations at AJC in Los Angeles. Holly previously served as the Policy Advisor to the Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism at the United States Department of State, and as a researcher in the Mandel Center of Advanced Holocaust Studies at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Both Saba and Holly were scholars in residence at Oxford University with the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. We're going to start with a short video, and then Holly will begin her lecture.
24/7 active shooter in the Tree of Life synagogue.
Hate crimes are up in most major cities.
More than half were anti-Jewish, far more than hate crimes targeting any other religious group.
The attacks have only heightened fears that anti-Semitism is on the rise.
With thousands of Jews fleeing Europe amidst the toxic hate.
Tensions still are high on Israel's northern border as Iran promises to punish Israel.
Hamas has fired hundreds of rockets and mortars, endangering civilians.
The power struggle in Venezuela has taken a sudden violent turn.
Recep Tayyip Erdogan, he now appears stronger than ever.
His critics fear that he's driving Turkey towards a dictatorship.
A new study has found that the bipartisan consensus of support for Israel is breaking down in the United States.
Rallying around the social media hashtag Show Up for Shabbat, started by the American Jewish Committee.
Convening at the Global Forum reflects the strong ties between Israel and the AJC global community. AJC has always stood by Israel.
We need the clear moral voice of the American Jewish Committee. You have fought for the core values that drive democracies.
Let us choose Rahmah, meaning compassion and caring about others.
This is part of our Staatsräson, meaning the national interest of my home country. The security of Israel and the Jewish people are not negotiable to us.
History has just been made here at the AJC Global Forum.
American Jewish Committee declared that Jews cannot ensure equality for themselves until and unless it is assured for all.
Welcome, everyone, to the second annual AJC Global Briefing Series. My name is Holly Huffnagel. Scott, thank you for the introduction. When we started this series a year ago, we had about 40 people that came. And I think tonight is a testament to the issues at hand, why we are all here, and how important combating anti-Semitism is. And I want to say thank you to Rabbi Nanis and Hannah Gohl and others at Wilshire Boulevard Temple for hosting us. We are here because they've opened their doors. So before we dive into tonight's lecture, I want to pull up this quote from Martin Luther King. This was the quote that ended the video. He's quoting AJC in 1960. And he says that Jews cannot ensure equality for themselves until and unless it is assured for all. And I think tonight, as we do a deep dive into anti-Semitism, the persecution and hatred of the Jewish people, we have to remember this, because we're really striving for the rights and the protections of all people. So I want this to be top of mind tonight and in the lectures ahead. Global anti-Semitism is rising. This is not new to you. This is not new to me, unfortunately. This is why we're all here. I don't want to start with statistics, letting you know that it's going up in France and in Germany and here in the US, because we know this. The question, though, that we're asked, why? Why is anti-Semitism rising? Why, within living memory of the Holocaust, is anti-Semitism going up? It shouldn't happen. What is causing it? Why now? We don't have an exact answer, but we do have some reasons. And I want you to walk away with those reasons in your toolbox when people ask why. So the spike in anti-Semitism is taking place in the context of several things. This is not a comprehensive list. But first is rising global economic uncertainty. The second is societal failure to integrate immigrants. Related to these first two is an increased emphasis on race and national identity, a lack of confidence in liberal democracy. Liberal democracies are the safest place for Jews, and there's a growing lack of confidence in them today. A fifth reason for this spike is the fading legacy of the Holocaust. Recent surveys show that 1/3 of Europeans know very little or nothing at all about the Holocaust. 1 in 5 Europeans between the ages of 18 and 34 have never heard about the Holocaust. This is today in Europe. The sixth reason is a deepening polarization between the political left and the political right on the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians. A seventh reason, which we know, is the internet, social media, definitely contributing to the rise of anti-Semitism today. For all the good the internet has brought us, it is also echo chambers of hate and a launch pad for lies and conspiracy theories. Lies spread 6 times faster than truth. 6 times faster than truth. And so what we're seeing is anti-Semitism that was once on the fringe coming into the mainstream and going from online to offline. And the last one, and again, this is not a comprehensive list. This doesn't excuse anti-Semitism, but it is a reason for its rise, is there's more sources. There are more sources today than at any other point in history. And I want to give you an example. The anti-Semitic murders in Paris, in Pittsburgh, and most recently in Jersey City, they all come from a different source. Think about that. And it's this complexity of anti-Semitism coming from these different sources, from these different sides, that are not only contributing to its rise, but making it all the more difficult to combat. And that's actually what AJC is doing right now. We are unpacking that complexity. We are offering specific policy recommendations depending on the source of anti-Semitism. And that is the genesis for this lecture series, this global briefing series. What are the main sources of anti-Semitism today? When we think about what is top of mind for the Jewish community, Muncie, what happened in Muncie, Trump's executive order on anti-Semitism, the politicization of anti-Semitism and the weaponization between the political left and the political right. All of those things are going to be covered. Starting tonight and within each month, going all the way to this last session. Now, before we dive into this first topic, anti-Semitism on the right, which is what we'll be working through tonight, I want to make a couple of points. The first is, in this 24/7 news cycle that we're in, and the virality of social media, I think it's easy to get caught up in it. And what I want to encourage us is tonight and in the months ahead to take a step back and look at the history of these sources, understand the history, and ask, how as a society did we get here? The second thing I want to say before we start is action. We're all coming here to learn tonight and in the weeks ahead, myself included. But what are we going to do with the education and the knowledge that we're learning tonight and in the months ahead? How are we going to act? What are we going to do with it? And AJC is actually going to conduct an advocacy training day after the last session, where we are going to train any of you here who want to take the knowledge that you've learned about anti-Semitism and bring it forth to elected officials, to diplomats, to policymakers, to law enforcement. Because that's what AJC in Los Angeles does on a daily basis. And we do need more people. The last point on this action is that in the fall 2020, next September, October, we're going to do a diplomatic marathon. Los Angeles has the second largest consular corps in the world. Over 100 consuls and honorary consuls are represented here in LA. And we're going to meet with them. And we're going to raise important issues, the Jewish community, combating anti-Semitism, promoting Israel's place in the world. And we're going to need people for that. So a plug for the future. All right, anti-Semitism on the right. Right-wing anti-Semitism, we could call it white ethno-nationalist anti-Semitism, Christian, traditional anti-Judaism. It's still the most pervasive form. That might come as a surprise. You know, we see what's happening around the world, and how is the far right, do they still have relevance? But most anti-Semitic incidents, including graffiti and desecration of Jewish graves, etc., are still from the far right today. Why? Because the far right, the right-wing anti-Semitism has the longest and most deep-rooted history. The subtitle of the lecture is Christian Anti-Judaism, White Supremacy, and Holocaust Denial and Distortion. When I was working on this lecture a few weeks ago, I chided myself saying, Holly, I have 30 more minutes with you. There's no way we're going to be able to cover all of these things with justice, but I will do my best. I want to start with a quote, though, by Mary C. Boyce. She's a religious scholar out of Union Theological Seminary. And this is what she says. Christian teaching formed the precondition of Nazi ideology, had Christianity not irrevocably transformed the Jews into mythical beings, Nazism would not have been able to do the same. So let's start. When I was in graduate school at Georgetown University, I took a one-on-one tutorial with a professor. His name was Father Dennis McManus. And for an entire semester, he taught me the history of Jewish-Christian relations. And it's from him that I'm going to use a framework tonight. It's a fascinating framework called Stages of Eliminationism. The argument is that throughout history, non-Jewish, and I'll put Christian in quotes, there have been non-Jewish and Christian attempts to eliminate Jews and Judaism from history. And I will bring up these 4 stages now. The first is the de-Judaizing the text being the Christian Bible, the New Testament. Removing Jesus from his Jewish context, if you will. Removing Judaism from Christianity. The second stage is expulsions and forced conversions. The elimination of the presence of the people, of Jews, expelling them, and the elimination of the religion, forcing Jews to convert to Christianity. The third stage of eliminationism is the Holocaust. The actual elimination of the people, the Jewish people. And in the fourth stage, you would think there would be no more stages after the Holocaust. But the fourth stage is Holocaust denial. The elimination of the memory of the Holocaust. The elimination of Holocaust facts, Holocaust truths. So let's start with stage 1, Judaizing the text. Now, there are anti-Jewish texts in the New Testament. But my argument is not going to be that that's really where anti-Judaism or anti-Semitism came from. It was really the interpretations of those texts, removing Jesus from his Jewish context, the dogma that would follow in the 4th and 5th centuries of the early church, that set the groundwork for Christian anti-Judaism, and eventually would lead to, or a contributing factor to, if you will, the Holocaust. I have a couple of texts, though, that I do want to show you, because they're critical when we talk about Christian anti-Judaism. I will preface these texts by saying that the New Testament writers were Jewish. They were writing predominantly to other Jews, so I do want to keep that at the fore. So this is from Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 27, verse 25. This is when Pilate is absolving himself of the responsibility for the death of Jesus. That bold verse is that key verse that has led to thousands of years of misery for Jewish people. It's where all the people, referring to the Jews that were there, answered, "His blood is on us and our children." Sometimes it even says, "and our children's children." The second text that I want to mention tonight is from the Gospel of John. Now, this one is a big one because John is actually quoting Jesus. John's writing, though, probably between 85 and 90 CE. So about 50 years after the death of Jesus, but he's reporting Jesus to have said this. Basically, the Jews replied, "We aren't illegitimate children, God himself is our father." And Jesus told them, "If God were your father, you would love me, because I came from the Father." And then Jesus says, in the bold, "For you are the children of your father, the devil, and you love to do the evil things he does." And interpretations of those two verses have led to something called the teachings of contempt. Christian contempt toward Jews and toward Judaism. The first one in Matthew, this might be familiar to many of you here, the deicide charge, the responsibility for the death of Jesus. This is the belief held by some Christians that the Jewish people as a whole were responsible for the death of Jesus. John Chrysostom, who was called the doctor of the church, he was a 4th century priest in Antioch, wrote a series of homilies against the Jews. And here he is chastising Christians for still spending time with Jews. He says, "Is it not folly for those who worship the crucified to celebrate festivals with those who crucified him? They killed the Son of your Lord, and yet you dare to gather with them in the same place." So this is the deicide charge. The deicide charge is not still in the medieval ages. It has been taken over, recycled, reused by another source of anti-Semitism, a source we will be talking about in early March, coming from the Muslim world. But here you have a Pietà of the Virgin Mary holding Jesus. You have an Israeli IDF soldier representing someone who's Jewish, and Mary is saying, "Don't kill him twice." Blatant anti-Semitism. Going back to that section of John, where Jesus is calling Jews the sons of the devil, is really the beginning of associations of Jewish communities and Jewish people with evil, with the devil. There are many caricatures throughout in medieval artwork of Jews following the devil, of the devil leading Jews, and you can tell they're Jews by the hats that they had to wear. Martin Luther's maybe a familiar name, the father of Lutheranism, really Protestantism. Toward the end of his life, many will argue he wasn't quite in his right state of mind, but still not excusable. In his On the Jews and Their Lies, said, calling Christian leaders to set their schools and synagogues on fire, eject them forever from the country so that we may all be free of this insufferable, devilish burden, the Jews. So again, bringing the evil, etc. up. I want to point to this quote on top. One thing that separates anti-Semitism or anti-Judaism, we'll talk about the difference in those terms in a second, than other forms of hatred, than anti-black racism, than homophobia, than sexism, Islamophobia, all the other kinds of hatreds, is that with hatred of the Jews, it's connected to some kind of alleged evil in the world, really rooted in Christianity. And it's that conspiratorial element that's unique to anti-Semitism. It does not exist really in other forms of hatred. All of this was really possible because of the Christian fathers' beliefs in supersessionism. This is kind of a big theological term, but basically what it means is that because Jews did not accept Jesus as this Messiah, that Christianity and Christians were now the new covenant with God, that Christianity had superseded Judaism. The old covenant had been broken. And this theology would actually guide the church for the next 1,500 years, really until and through the Holocaust. Then it would be revised. But it took the Holocaust happening, actually, for the Catholic Church to change this theology. Part of this practice of discriminating against Jews and this belief in supersessionism was limited professions for Jews, which many of us here probably know, but also having the Jews wear certain markings to identify themselves. It was in the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215 that the papacy made Jews in like all through Europe, Christian Europe, wear a yellow badge, a yellow circle, which might sound familiar. The Nazis did in the 1930s and 40s. But starting in the 13th century, Jews had to wear a yellow circle on their clothes to identify them. Most scholars think that that yellow circle was connected to money and the fact that one of the only professions that Jews were allowed to have was as moneylenders. It was actually this forced medieval profession, which is where we have stereotypes of Jewish wealth and money that still exist and are perpetrated or promulgated today, even by politicians and elected officials. I will show you an example, not from the United States. This is Christina Kirchner. When she was the president of Argentina, she met with a group of students, and she asked them if they had read The Merchant of Venice. You know, Shylock, the character, the moneylender, like the quintessential Jew for the anti-Semitic mind. She said, read The Merchant of Venice to understand vulture funds. And then she tweeted to her 3.8 million followers, after they had laughed when she had said that she said that usury and the bloodsuckers were immortalized by the best literature for centuries. She's actually dabbled in other anti-Semitic tropes as well. She was, I think, out of office in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, but just recently she was re-elected as vice president of Argentina. So if you're following Argentinian politics, she is now the vice president of Argentina. This is also something that might be familiar to many of you here when we talk about Christian anti-Judaism, and that's ritual murder. There's actually two types of ritual murder. Most people know the blood libel. This is the first one. It's that Jews needed the blood of Christian children to make matzah for Passover. Very irrational, if you know anything about, this does not make sense. It's irrational. It's this mixture of Christianity with pagan rituals. The issue, of course, is that it's recycled. This is the same image on the front page of Julius Streicher's Der Stürmer, 1939, the most popular issue ever published, letting Germans know that this is something that Jews are still doing. The other form of ritual murder, which is actually not as well known, is something called host desecration. In the same council, in 1215, that made Jews wear that yellow badge, the papacy decided that the Eucharist, or the host, or the communion wafer, this is for Christians, the body of Christ, was actually the body of Christ, that Jesus was present in the bread. When the papacy declares this, a whole new set of basically deicide charges coming up again. That Jews, because they killed Christ once, are going to perpetually try to kill Christ and desecrate the host. So you see an image here of blood coming out of bread. Again, quite irrational. Again, though, this doesn't stay in medieval Christian Europe. These are images from just the past 5 years. Again, it's a different source, though. It's not on the right. This is almost a teaser, if you will, for the lectures to come. But we're starting with this session first, Christian anti-Judaism, because it has given so much material to the anti-Semites in other parts of the world. Here again, you have someone who's Jewish eating a child and drinking the blood. Another example, and then we'll move on to the next phase of eliminationism. Poisoning the wells, water. Jews were accused in medieval Europe, and this is in the mid-1300s, of causing the bubonic plague. So here's an image of Jews, purportedly poisoning the water. There was a report a few years ago, actually, when I was working at the State Department, that Israelis were accused of poisoning Palestinian water. This was a cartoon from a few years ago from a German newspaper, where you have Netanyahu poisoning bread that he would then give to the bird. That's the peace process. the Middle East peace. You don't have to necessarily call this anti-Semitic. I think it is. But it's definitely problematic because it is rooted in 1,500 years of Christian anti-Judaism, of persecution of Jews, of blaming Jews for other ills. This one will go quickly. Stage 2 of eliminationism really takes those above things that I mentioned and leads to the expulsions and the forced conversions of Jews, eliminating Jewish presence in the land and eliminating Judaism, forcing Jews to convert. These are some main expulsions out of Europe. The most well-known is Spain, Inquisition, 1492. And it wasn't just 1 year. It was 300 years that would come to the Americas, where conversos would be tormented in Mexico and other countries in Latin America. It would not be until after the Holocaust that the Catholic Church, and I mentioned this, will come to reconcile with what really happened. That 1,500 years, 2,000 years of prepping a society to hate and discriminate and push away and demonize other people would lay the groundwork for the Nazis to do their job. Quick question here. And you could please raise your hand. I'm used to a classroom setting, so I like to interact with you all. How many of you here have heard of Nostra Aetate? Handful of people. Okay, great. Most Christians haven't. Most Christians, at least in the younger demographic, still haven't heard of Nostra Aetate. So, Nostra Aetate was a document that the Catholic Church produced in 1965, published in 1965 at the Second Vatican Council. It was a document that was to explain the Church's relationship with other religions, with non-Christian religions. But it was really about the Church's relationship with Judaism, with the Jewish community. This is what this document says. It reaffirmed the Jewish roots of Christianity. It rejected the charge of deicide, decried anti-Semitism, and it affirmed God's eternal covenant with the Jewish people. When we look at this in today's standards, we should say, oh, of course, this is obvious. This was monumental because it overturned those 1,500, 2,000 almost years of church doctrine and dogma and teaching which said everything opposite. We're talking a lot about head knowledge right now. So I want to give you an action example. AJC, Scott mentioned that we're we're the oldest American Jewish advocacy organization, but we were actively involved in the creating of this document. AJC had been building relationships with the Vatican in the 40s, 50s, and we actually helped edit, contributed to the text. This is a picture here of Cardinal Bay, who was the main architect of the Nostra Aetate, with Rabbi Heschel at AJC's offices in New York, 1963. Small good news story. But moving on, stage 3. So we have stage 1, stage 2, really tied with Christian anti-Judaism. How do we get from Christian anti-Judaism to the racial, genocidal anti-Semitism of the Nazis? We first have to really actually understand what happened in the 19th century, and I promise you I'm not going to give you a whole 100-year history. I'll go quickly. But anti-Jewish sentiment amongst Christians is secularized. So it's no longer necessarily going to be about religious feelings toward the Jews. After the Enlightenment and Jewish emancipation, where Jews were given rights and freedoms like everyone else, Jews could now be lawyers and doctors. They weren't just confined to traditional professions. There's a response. This is when anti-Semitism becomes a political movement. in response to something called the Jewish question. There was the Irish question. There was the woman question. It was this idea of, well, we're now rational, civilized, nationalizing societies. But really what this question was is still connected with Christianity. Because the question is, how should Jews be integrated, right, into Christian nations? And the argument by many was that they shouldn't be. Why? Because they were a different race. Wilhelm Marr, you see pictured here, German publicist, 1879. He wanted to make the hatred of Jews about race and no longer about religion. Something that was more scientific sounding, more rational. So what term does he popularize? 1879? Antisemitismus. Anti-Semitism. It's a modern vintage. It's not an old term. And it avoided the question of religion. It sounded more intellectual, therefore more credible, acceptable. But this is the thing. I really apologize for my microphone. There is no such thing as a race or a people called Semites. Semitic is a philological term. It's been pulled from linguistics. These are the Semitic-speaking people. Amharic is a Semitic language. Arabic is a Semitic language. Yes, Hebrew. But when the anti-Semites in Germany were using the term, they were really using it as a racist term and only referring to Jews. So the word Semitism is really a pseudo-scientific racial classification, which has obviously now been discredited. It's actually one of the reasons why we shouldn't hyphenate the word, because there is no such thing as Semitism to be against. Small grammatical thing. The English language is catching up, but most non-English languages keep it as one unified word. With this new racial ideology to refer to Jews, on the other end, you have the counterpoint, right? The white race. Well, what is the white Aryan race? Okay, well, they're the ones that are more powerful, etc. This is the belief. But white supremacy actually did not, when it took root and took hold, became strong, was not in Europe. This is what white supremacy is. I think we might know. The belief that white people are superior. It started here in the United States. And I think we forget that sometimes. When we hear like the Charlottesville rallies, the cries of Jews will not replace us, and blood and soil, that actually didn't start in Nazi Germany. It started here in America, and it was because we really are the ones who started white nationalism, this idea that white people need to control politics, they need to have the power. This goes back to our relationship, actually, with African Americans. AJC has on their website, we have this thing called Global Voice, where we really analyze tough issues, and white supremacy and white nationalism is one of them. And so what you're going to see now actually comes from an AJC resource, which is open to any of you who go to our website. But in relation to Jews, was born in the United States, we also gave ideas to Adolf Hitler. This is a quote that he gave in 1932. a year before he came to power. New York Times interview. He says, "It was America that taught us a nation should not open its doors equally to all nations. And Nazi leaders would actually visit and learn from the Jim Crow South on how to segregate Jews in Nazi Germany." The second thing about white supremacy is that Jews are enemy number one. Anti-Semitism is the core of white supremacist ideology. Jews are enemy number one. African Americans and other minorities are enemy number two. Why are Jews enemy number one? Because the white supremacist believes that the Jews control the other minorities. So again, this is another kind of anti-Semitic conspiratorial element, that Jews are the puppeteers and they're controlling the other minorities. And also that they have somehow betrayed the quote-unquote white race by supporting other minorities, by supporting immigrants. In 1920, Henry Ford would actually be the one to make the Protocols of the Elders of Zion the most popular. So Protocols, Anti-Semitic Forgery, 1905, out of Russia, technically an unknown author. But Henry Ford would publish them in full, in a series he called The Independent Jew, and spread all over America. Up until 2004, this is a random fact, Walmart actually still stocked The Independent Jew. It's off the shelves now. But Hitler and Goebbels would actually praise Henry Ford for what he was doing in this regard. And the last point I want to mention when we look at white supremacy is that murdering Jews is sometimes seen as a call to arms. If I've read the White Genocide Manifesto, it's awful, but it really is seen as this call to arms, that there is supposed to be this race revolution that's happening, that's been building up for centuries. The shooters of Pittsburgh and Poway both hoped, this is why they publicized, like on social media, they both hoped that their murders would be the start of this revolution. Which, again, talking about action here, it was another reason why it was so important for us to push back on that. And this has come up already, but in response to Pittsburgh and the Show Up for Shabbat campaign, which reached 250 million people, 250 million people interacted with this, the AJC started. It was actually the largest ever expression of solidarity with the American Jewish community. But what it did was it showed the white supremacists that there isn't a revolution, and there are not white people on all your side, and your ideology is not going to prevail. I'm going to go through the next slides a little bit quickly because I also want to move into a second segment of our time this evening. After the Holocaust, the far right basically went underground. Nazism and the defeat of Nazism in Europe had pretty much discredited far-right ideology. But we now know it's come back. It's come back for many reasons. I actually plan on sending you this material after this lecture, so you'll be able to go through it on your own. One of the main reasons actually for its return is the fall of communism. You know, when the pendulum's gone too far, it's come back that way. There are also other many reasons, from immigration to globalization to loss of jobs, etc. But you can see this trend of red, where you see the red is really where the far right is gaining power in Europe, also here in the US. I want to spend a couple of seconds on the characteristics of the far right before moving into this fourth final stage of eliminationism. These kind of look familiar. When we talk about traditional, Christian, this is the Christian anti-Judaism, ethnocentrist, white, extreme nationalism, fascism. I like what Deborah Lipstadt says about neo-Nazism. She says we can call them neo-Nazis, but it doesn't really matter if we put a neo in front. They're Nazis. But that's neo-Nazism to describe a characteristic of the far right.
because the far right is a follower of fascism, still often of Hitler, and I would say even the extreme far right, it is in this context that you'll have beginnings of Holocaust denial and Holocaust distortion. And this brings us to stage 4, the fourth and final stage of eliminationism. Eliminating the memory. If the Holocaust wasn't enough, eliminating the memory of the Holocaust, eliminating Holocaust truths and Holocaust facts. This is a quote from Jean-Marie Le Pen. He's the founder of the National Front Party, which still exists. It's been taken over by his daughter. He said, "The Holocaust was a minute detail in the Second World War." Holocaust denial and distortion, they're a little related. Denial, Holocaust didn't happen. Distortion's a little more complicated. Because it happened, but there weren't 6 million Jews. Oh, there weren't any gas chambers. Oh, the Nazis did some of it, but it was really the local people, or the opposite. The local people did not collaborate at all. The Nazis did everything. Or, even worse, blaming the Jews for causing their genocide. It's all part of distortion. Both of these things start on the far right. Both of them. But today, it's not the far right that Holocaust denial is the most popular. It's coming from the Muslim world. From the Muslim world. The Middle East, often in relation to Israel. Because if the Holocaust didn't happen, then Israel shouldn't exist. So the narrative goes. Again, this is a source that's coming, so a little teaser. Now, there are individual Holocaust deniers. There are individual Holocaust distorters. You've got David Duke, we have David Irving. But I'm not as worried about the individuals. I'm worried about governments. I'm worried about the right-wing governments that are now in power in Central and Eastern Europe who are revising the Holocaust. I want to give you one example. I'll give you 10, but I'm going to give you just one for the interest of time. In Poland today, the right-wing Law and Justice Party is making it an active campaign to reestablish the good name of Poland. And some of the things they're doing are historically accurate, some, but many are not. And I want to show you some fascinating statistics, and it doesn't look good. 2005, 51% of respondents said that Auschwitz was a place of Jewish suffering. You would think it might be higher, but to be honest, up until 1990, most Poles didn't even know that Jews had really died at Auschwitz, because the communist narrative told them that it was all Poles. So this is actually a pretty high number. 2010, the number's a little bit lower. 47% of respondents think that Auschwitz is a place of Jewish, that the majority of people who died were Jews at Auschwitz. What happens in 2015? The number has dropped from 51% to 33%. And on the flip side, 47% of the Poles surveyed said that Auschwitz was primarily a place of Polish martyrdom. We know 1.1 million people died at Auschwitz. 90,000 were Poles. I'm nervous about this. I want to end here. This other piece related to Holocaust revisionism is something called the canard of moral equivalency. This is saying that Poles were also persecuted by the Nazis, and so were Jews, so we were both victims, equal victims. Not just Poles, other countries as well, other nations as well. Something called the double genocide narrative. That what happened under Stalin, Soviet occupation, was the same thing that would happen under Hitler. The Soviet Gulag was the same as the Nazi concentration camps. What's happening with this double genocide narrative is a big push right now for a Memorial Day of victims of totalitarianism. But what this would do would be to replace a specific day to commemorate the Holocaust. Really kind of lumping all the victims together. Their sufferings were equal. This is revisionism at its core. Tying the moral score would somehow absolve the governments and the populations from having to restitute property, from having to feel guilty, etc. Holocaust revisionism today is not just happening in Poland, it's happening in Hungary, it's happening in Serbia and Slovakia and Lithuania. It's a real challenge, and it's something that I dealt with a lot when I worked at the US Department of State, working directly with these governments. Final story, and then I'm going to invite a special speaker up here. Action. What are we doing about Holocaust denial, about Holocaust revisionism? In 2015, AJC helped spearhead a major campaign against Prime Minister Viktor Orban in Hungary. Orban's government was donating money for a statue to be built of this man right here, Bálint Homan. Probably no one here knows that name. I didn't either. But I was involved with this when I was at the State Department, and I worked very closely with AJC. Bálint Homan helped draft the anti-Jewish legislation which would strip Hungarian Jews of their citizenship so they could be quote-unquote legally deported to Auschwitz in 1944. And the Hungarian government was supporting a statue to be built of him in his honor. Oh, because he was also a Hungarian national hero. Didn't matter if he was also an anti-Semite. The statue didn't go up. The coalition that AJC helped build included members of Congress, included the US Department of State, the European Commission. I could go on. Didn't go up. And that's why coalition building is actually so important. And I want to end this section because with this kind of success story, talking about anti-Semitism is draining, and it's awful, and it makes us feel really powerless. So I'm going to end on a good note, because I'm an optimist. There are more coalitions and partnerships in the fight against anti-Semitism today than ever before in history. Jewish communities today, in this very moment, have more non-Jewish allies also ever before in history. One such ally is the government of Germany. That may sound surprising, given the history. The government of Germany has actually done more to preserve Holocaust memory, to restitute Holocaust survivors, to give back to what happened in any other country. And tonight, we actually have a representative from the Federal Republic of Germany, Consul General Stefan Schneider, who is the Consul General here in Los Angeles. And I'm going to be able to have a conversation with him about what's happening, for him to give his insights to all of you. So, at this point, can we please welcome Consul General Stefan Schneider to the stage. Thank you so much, Consul General Schneider, for joining us tonight. I know you're coming from another event. We really appreciate your time. I want to start just with an overarching question. We know that approximately 80% of German Jews believe that anti-Semitism has increased in the last 5 years. 80% of German Jews surveyed believe that anti-Semitism is going up. 30% of the non-Jewish, the regular German public, think that it's rising. So there's this disconnect between 80% and 30%. From your perspective, what's happening in Germany? Is anti-Semitism increasing? And I know you also have personal experiences related to this topic, so if you don't mind sharing those with us as well, appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Holly. Thank you very much for inviting me and talking about what's going on in Germany. And we have been talking, and thank you for your presentation. Even I learned a lot, and I'm very much dealing with that issue also for private reasons, not just for professional reasons. And especially you are the exercise, you are interpreting the Christian texts. And I do remember that I was not allowed to. I'm a Christian, I'm a goy, but I remember because part of my family is Jewish. My mother told me very early that the Jews did not kill Jesus. I remember that. So, but you know, that has to do with the special background of my family, perhaps. But anyhow, and talking about anti-Semitism in Germany now, and there's one interesting thing. 3 years ago, I served as the director of the cultural department at our embassy in Rome. And I was invited with other colleagues from all over the world, from German missions, to a special seminar. It was named Anti-Semitism in Germany, Jewish Life in Germany, and our politics against anti-Semitism. I remember that, and I immediately applied for participating in that seminar. And it was a seminar, it was 1 hour, one week, entire week, from morning to evening, and we met very many Jewish organizations, went to synagogues. We would talk to experts, statistic people, and diplomats, colleagues, to Felix Klein. You, of course, I think the name is familiar to you. Who is
the special envoy, if you will, Commissioner on Combating Anti-Semitism in Germany, Felix Klein.
And we discussed also anti-Semitism, of course, in Germany, based on statistic results. And I realized, and I'm a critical person. Of course, I'm a diplomat, and of course, I'm well educated. But I remember there was one person from a statistic institution, and would explain from where anti-Semitism is coming from, the right wing, the right movement or the left movement, and I asked the question because I'm very sensitive personally as well, and I'm living in a neighborhood in Berlin which is predominantly not Christian and not Jewish, to put it this way, and the daily curse among children is, and the worst kind of insult you can make is to say "du Jude," okay, and that is just around the corner of my house. I do have a kindergarten just next to my building. I live in a loft, and there's a big kindergarten, and that's predominantly, let's put it this way, non-Christian, non-Jewish. And that was a daily routine, in inverted commas, to listen to that "du Jude," there are 3 curses. "Du Jude" is the worst. And the second is "you are a gay guy," and the third one is "you victim," "du Opfer." And I had that in mind, and I asked the guy from statistics, how do you put that into the statistics? And I had a discussion, and I remember I was controlled and angry. And I said, we have also to find out what is behind that. And they said, and I explained, how do you distinguish between the right anti-Semitism and left anti-Semitism? And I said, what's about the anti-Semitism in the mainstream anti-Semitism? We are always discussing the left and the right, the neo-Nazis or the left extremists. But what I am concerned is what I call the hidden anti-Semitism, or some people call it secondary anti-Semitism. Let's say if you distinguish the classical, in inverted commas, anti-Semitism with others, that's horrible things you also show to us. You know, these stereotypes, race, in inverted commas, and everything that Jews would eat, Christian children, whatever. That is a classic one. But the hidden one is a sentence like, I broke a friendship when I listened to that sentence. It's a very, seems to be a very innocent sentence. Well, it's a sentence what some friend, former friend, said to me just like, oh, do you know, Stefan, the Jews owe all the banks. And it was an academic. I'm not talking about these uneducated people we find in your country, in my country, all over the world. I'm talking about an academic person. And we all know academics, they themselves consider themselves to be intelligent, going to the sources, being scientific, and trying to avoid any kind of prejudice. And I was just, you know, I was like a refrigerator. It was cold and I said, bye-bye.
So this story is actually probably exemplified why 80% of German Jews today think that anti-Semitism is rising, because it's so many sources and it's from
yep, you know, but
the
this is from the middle of society. What I would like to explain is that we have better sources of identifying anti-Semitic incidents and threats and hate crimes, and at the same time, the rising anti-Semitism in the internet is a curse, is horrible. But at the same time, we realize, because all this is anonymous, it's not a person, first name, last name. It's, I don't know, Bumblebee number 220 or whatever. We don't know who is behind it. That's even worse. And then you realize it comes from all, so the internet is, and excuse me that word, can be a bitch. Excuse me, please. And that's, but can be also a chance. At the same time, you can identify. You can identify that something is going on. And this is due to the modern technology. You realize there's much more anti-Semitism around that you might think. Right. And people we have a kind of brutalization of our societies in the West. That people, they don't care in saying things of that kind. They say, I am fed up with all that. I say what I think about the Jews. I'm fed up and this, that, and that, and that. And that's what I call brutalization of society. It's not just about anti-Semitism. You go on the street, they normally, if you walk and somebody comes in your way, the person would say, oh, I'm sorry. More and more I see people in this country, but also in my country, they don't go out of the way. They'll say, hey, come on, hey, what's going on here? That's what I call brutalization of society, and with it comes also this anti-Semitism, with this outspoken anti-Semitism.
Right. This is really interesting that you're bringing
that
this
you should
up,
just you know, it's, and what it's not, the word hidden might be wrong, but it's kind of, sometimes there are sentences around, at first you say, kind of, what is wrong with that? And say, oh my God. This is even more, however, the typical anti-Semitism, you can identify it easily. But it's when it comes to this kind of, for example, critics against the politics of Israel. You might, and you all know that Germany is a very, very close ally to Israel. And of course, we do also criticize Israel sometimes officially, because we are friends. And a good friendship is all about is saying what we think. This is not anti-Semitism. And no Israeli would say that it's anti-Semitism. Right. But some people hide their anti-Semitism in critics against Israel.
This is another lecture that's coming in the future.
Yeah, that's a very good example. I have a friend of mine, still a friend. He was not so bad, but however, no, it was really difficult for me. We have very good trade relations with Israel. We have agricultural products. You can buy agricultural products from Israel and Germany, of course. And we have the famous Jaffa oranges. I don't know whether you have them here. We have the Jaffa oranges. And some guy said to me on the market, and I saw, oh, I need some oranges. And I said, okay, well, here are the Jaffa oranges. I do not buy that.
Jaffa.
Hidden anti-Semitism or not hidden anti-Semitism? I do not. Why don't you buy this? You remember, you see in history, you see this Jewish shops in Germany, they put on Kaufe nicht bei Juden. Don't buy at Jewish shops. And I said to him, listen, this sounds like Kauf nicht beim Juden. And he said, no, it's just because they come perhaps from Palestinian territories and Israel is declaring that for being an Israeli product. I said, but, you know, Jaffa is clear.
No,
but anyhow, but this is something we have to be careful. Here and everywhere in the world, it's this kind of, you know, smart, in inverted commas, please, and underline smart.
So I want to switch the conversation to the more open anti-Semitism, the far right, which it sounds weird to say that at least we know who they are. We know who the far right are.
They
They're
are
proud of
easier
being,
to
they're
do- to-
easier to, exactly.
Yes.
So I want to actually ask this next question, which is related to what happened on Yom Kippur in Halle, the far right extremists who killed 2 people after trying to get into the synagogue. And then the following month, in November, the city of Dresden, the city council passed a resolution declaring a Nazi emergency in that city. The question I have for you is, can you speak specifically to the rise of the far right, maybe talk about the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland? Are there differences between East Germany and West Germany? And then the very last point is something that we've noted with the rise of far right populism is something called Holocaust fatigue. That Germans are tired of hearing about the Holocaust or feeling guilty for it. Can you address that for us?
Yeah, that's always in Germany. We have been discussing that for quite long, even before Halle, which was a kind of wake-up call. I think you said wake-up call, and I was just in my notes, I have wake-up call, by the way. So, and to say West or East, more or less anti-Semitism, it's kind of difficult to say that, because within Germany we have that discourse. Oh no, the West Germans say, oh, the East Germans say, I know, they didn't have that education. We do have, they are more anti-Semite than we are. That's very dangerous to say that. And again, I would say that's my personal viewpoint. My personal viewpoint is, in West Germany, perhaps the knowledge on that kind of secondary anti-Semitism is more developed. It's a thesis, could be scientifically, be enlightened, I don't know. And I would say, but in those societies, what's most interesting is anti-Semitism and xenophobia. You find more in communities in Germany which do not have that many foreigners and do not have that many Jewish people. It's interesting. If you go to a small, west or east, to a small village, and you might find all these anti-Semite attitudes or also these xenophobic attitudes. And then what I'm doing very often when I see these people say, do you know some Jewish neighbor? Do you know a migrant? No, they are not here. And I said, how can you judge? I mean, excuse me. And that's interesting. If people, or in Germany, in the Nazi time, my mother would tell me that story, because a part of my family is Jewish, and my mother comes from that side, okay? And I asked her, what happened when you were a kid? She was born in 1928. So she had a lot of experience. And after the war, they all came to her father, my grandfather, Jewish grandfather, and wanted to have what we call Persilschein. That means a kind of, let's say, how do you say that in English? Oh, that's a hard word. You know, like a certificate saying that this man or this woman was not anti-Semitic, signed, and that's the best kind of, for these people, signed by a Jewish German. And they came to my grandfather, these people who would change from one side of the street to the other. When my grandfather came, these people came to him and asked him to give that sign.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah.
Could you just speak briefly, and then
Sure.
we're going to open it up soon to
That is
questions
difficult
about
to say, you know, that's to ask last question to say, anti-Semitism increasing, I would say yes. At the same time, I say there are more people due to that brutalization of society who speak out. And we're already there, but now more and more people say, and the last question you said about, you know, I'm fed up with that issue and all that.
Fatigue,
okay.
yes.
It is interesting, in Germany you sometimes listen to people, they reproach to the Jewish people that they had the Holocaust. You make us feel bad because you had the Holocaust? That's a perversion of thoughts. And we're asking, there is, let's say, and my problem is, and my concern is, and I'm always telling younger people, and the famous millenniums and the younger ones, to be aware what happened at the Holocaust, because the longer we are away from 1945, the less people know. But Germany does a lot of efforts to teach and to teach and to teach and to talk about it, because we have a big problem in our schools, in the West and in the East. We have we have a multicultural society more and more in Germany. And more and more we have people coming to Germany, coming from a different social, education, and national and religious background. And there are some stereotypes about Jewish people we are importing somehow. And we have in some schools, especially also in Berlin, Jewish kids being attacked by non-Jewish kids. I have to be diplomatic, but you can imagine what I mean. And now the teachers see the necessity even more to teach, to talk about it. And even more, they are sometimes verbally and even physically attacked by kids.
The teachers.
By kids. The teachers are attacked
by the kids who are,
the kids attack the teacher, sometimes physically, when they say something of defending Jewish people. It is not, don't be, it's not a enormous phenomenon, but more and more here and there, we do have that situation.
Yeah. I'm going to go to my final quick question, and this is actually about the government of Germany, what the government is doing. In this summer, in June 2020, AJC, we're having our annual global forum in Berlin this year. It's the first time we've actually ever had it in Berlin. It's thousands of people coming together for days of plenary sessions, talking about top-of-mind issues. We're doing it because it's the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, 30th anniversary of the reunification of Germany, and we're partnering with the government of Germany on this, on this forum. Can you just tell us, to kind of conclude our session together, a couple points? What is the government of Germany doing to combat this rising anti-Semitism?
I brought this with me to document something. This is just a part of my collection I have, not just about what the German government is doing, but what's all about anti-Semitism. I have 10 of them.
So
I arrived here a year ago, or even 15 months ago, and I started with that collection. And what was interesting enough, with Felix Klein, we explain, he is the guy in the German government at the Ministry of the Interior to raise that issue and always to exonerate the government to do even more. And he had developed some ideas to be realized in Germany, is still pending. He was very much relying also on the necessity of increasing education, Holocaust education in German schools. It's a very important point for him. And also, when it comes to the application of the laws to increase penalties for anti-Semitic crimes, and he asked for more severe punishment. And also, he asked for a combination of preventive and repressive measures against anti-Semitism. That's very important. And that even the threat of an anti-Semitic act is being punished. That is the federal government's perspective, but I would like to add, if I may, because Germany is not just, as the United States, we are a federal state. We have 16 states with their own police. Police in Germany is not federal. We have a federal police, but they take care of our foreign missions, and they have specific duties. But police is done by 16 states independently. So it's not just about the federal government who is involved, but also the governments of the 16 states of the Federal Republic of Germany. And also the communities, municipalities, cities. Because to find, I would say, that's my personal point of view, a kind of common standard to fight anti-Semitism. You talked about Dresden. Dresden took that decision. Okay. Right. Do we have that from Düsseldorf or from Cologne? But they do have other measures against anti-Semitism. Therefore, it's important, and Mr. Klein was also talking about that, to have a kind of unified approach to combat anti-Semitism. That's very important. So, and and civil society. It's not just about the government. It's about everybody, every mother, every father, to do this. No, it's not just my country. It's not just the government. We should not. We should, in my view, we should not just, and I should not say that as an official of the federal government, but it's not just the government. No, it's all of us.
All of us.
And
So true.
it's your family, it's your teacher, it's everybody. And you have to break up friendship when somebody tells you the Jews all the banks, by the way. Break up friendship. It was a hard thing to do after 35 years. Okay. So that was just my remarks of this. Not only the government, everybody. All these 86 million Germans.
Thank you so much, Consul General Schneider. I really, really appreciate it. I'm actually going to call, I'm going to call now Rick Hirsch to the stage. He's our director of AJC Los Angeles to offer concluding remarks for the interest of time. And I'll stay here at the end if anyone has questions. Happy to answer any of your questions. So Rick, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are...
Go back to
What you have experienced and witnessed this evening is AJC at its very finest. It doesn't get any better or deeper or richer or more informational or more emotive than what you saw and what you experienced right here tonight. I feel like, I'm not going to say the proud papa, but I feel a lot like the proud big brother with the great privilege and blessing of having Holly Huffnagel in the house, on our staff, here in Los Angeles. Usually, there's the old adage that you're a genius in a different city. We have that genius right here. Each and every day as we confront the challenges of anti-Semitism. And to have Consul General Stefan Schneider, the best of the Consular Corps, right here in Los Angeles on this stage tonight as well. Please, another. We are weaving through a very interesting time. This lecture series, and it is in fact a series, as you heard earlier and throughout the course of the evening, this is part one of a 4-part series, and even part 4 is not the end. It's really just the beginning. And while all of this is unfolding, the world is happening. We pick up the paper every morning. We open our iPhones and our iPads every morning, and we brace for the what next. What did we miss in the last 12 hours? The news has not been good. But we will not be deflated or defeated. AJC is a remarkable organization and a tremendous platform for good, for optimism, for resilience, and for pushing back against hate and anti-Semitism. And doing it with allies. We heard about Bishop Ken Ulmer and the event that will take place on January 19th. Sometimes it's important that we in the Jewish community vote with our feet, that we show up. And hopefully as many of you as can possibly attend on that Sunday, the same weekend as the Martin Luther King observance that will follow the next day, it will matter to show up, to be there at that church in Englewood. So tonight is a beginning. We're living in difficult times. The sky is not falling, but there are rumbles. There are thunderclaps. But this is a moment when we can each begin to engage. AJC is here for you. It doesn't belong to a privileged few. This is your organization. And there is an entry point. It's as easy as ajc.org, or it's calling any one of our professional staff or any one of our board members and leaders who are here tonight. Some of them wearing name tags, some of them, you know them already, and they don't need to wear name tags. And it starts with Scott Edelman and all the way across, Eva Dworsky and others, and I know now that I've started naming them, I've left many out. So please forgive me. That's what we're about. We're about a collective that stands up to hate and that ultimately believes in a better world. This is a new year, a new secular new year, but still a new year, and an important new year, 2020. Let 2020 be our vision. Let it be a clear focus to improve our world and push back against the haters. We certainly outnumber them. We need to raise our voices and be louder than them. So tonight is just the beginning. We hope to see you in February. Good night. God bless.